I like to actually just picture the average legislator. I think most people assume that they have an army of well-paid staffers that help inform their every move. They don't, especially at the state level. The reality is they might have two staff, right? One does the schedule, one is tracking policy. But policy means everything.
Yeah.
Like energy is just a small slice of what they're thinking about on any given day. And so they rely heavily on trusted partners. And sometimes, more often than not, history has proven that those partners are utilities. They're the trusted voice whispering in their ear. And so one thing that Vote Solar tries to do, and I try to do as a lobbyist in a couple of states, is to have a different voice whispering in their ear.
Yeah.
A voice that paints this picture of an equitable, clean energy future.
Everyone knows that underscoring any good solar market is a sound solar policy. Policy means legislation. Legislation means advocacy. And advocacy is the cornerstone of any sector's growth. This is just the way business is done. How do we do that? Where do the real battles get fought? We'll talk about all that and more today at the Suncast Media Zone. We're live at the Midwest Solar Expo, brought to you by Solar Simplified. I'm your host, Nico Johnson. I'm joined by my friend John Delurey, who leads the Midwest Region Advocacy for a company that almost needs no introduction, organization rather, called Vote Solar. Vote Solar is one of the, if not the most iconic companies and organizations that helps proffer better and more prolific solar policy in the United States. And this guy, John Delurey, is one of the folks that helps make it happen. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you. I remember this time last year when we first met at this very conference. Thank you, Midwest Solar, for introducing me to highly intelligent folks. I saw you speak from the stage, and I came up to you afterwards and said, you've got what it takes, man. You deserve to be on stage, because you have a poise about you that speaks to the depth of understanding you have about the topic, right? Like your ability to navigate a conversation with a congressperson about a topic that likely they don't know as much nuance as they would want to believe they would, but their team does. And that's because you've informed their team, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been in the solar advocacy policy game?
It's been about 12 years.
Yeah.
And it started in a very different place. I was overseas doing off-grid solar, mostly in East Africa and India.
No way.
Yeah, that's what sparked my interest way back when.
How fantastic.
And then I did some Sierra Club work, shutting down coal plants, trying to get munis and co-ops to go solar. So I've had different chapters, but solar has been the through point for about 12 years.
Were you a Peace Corps volunteer as well?
No, I was sort of a wannabe Peace Corps volunteer.
Okay.
I hung out with a lot of Peace Corps volunteers, but I worked for...
You're a DIY Peace Corps volunteer.
Exactly. I sort of like cobbled it together, got some funding from the feds to learn Swahili, and the rest kind of packed in. It was great.
That's cool. What countries?
It was Tanzania mostly, living in Zanzibar.
Yeah. Are you a coffee snob as a result?
I became one pretty quickly. Between that and
That's
some
fair.
visits to Ethiopia, it was hard to go back.
It's fair.
It was great.
Yeah. So, as I said, the underlying foundation architecture of any good solar program is the policy, and that policy is not something that legislators come up with on their own.
Sure.
Could you give us a quick primer on how policy comes to be?
Yeah. I like to actually just picture the average legislator. I think most people assume that they have an army of well-paid staffers that help inform their every move.
Yep.
They don't, especially at the state level. The reality is they might have two staff, right? One does the schedule, one is tracking policy. But policy means everything.
Yeah.
Like energy is just a small slice of what they're thinking about on any given day. And so they rely heavily on trusted partners.
Yeah.
And sometimes, more often than not, history has proven that those partners are utilities.
Yeah.
This is why their lobbyists have so much power. It's not just money, right? They're there every day. They're the trusted voice whispering in their ear.
Yeah.
And so one thing that Vote Solar tries to do, and I try to do as a lobbyist in a couple of states, is to have a different voice whispering in their ear. A voice that paints this picture of an equitable, clean energy future.
I like the angle that we've taken here is, if we think about it from the perspective of the desk of that congressperson or that legislator, then it paints a different picture for us of what advocacy looks like. So if we can unpack the advocacy landscape from the perspective of a staffer, what might that look like?
You're trying to help them make the right decision.
Right.
A lot of legislators are there because they want to do good by their constituents, by the planet.
Yeah.
It starts to shift once they get in there and realize how hard everything it is to move. And so they rely on groups helping to guide the way for what comes next. Oftentimes it's a case of outside agitators like myself, like advocates, helping to organize the caucus, the Democratic caucus or the Green caucus, to help them paint that picture for, in 2 years, we're going to start trying to pass this big bill. What do we need to do right now? And they are constantly fighting fires. They aren't able to really put their heads above the trenches and look ahead at what's coming on the horizon.
Yeah.
And that's often our job in the advocacy community.
It's something I love about Vote Solar, right? Almost now 20 years in existence. The vision of the long-term requirement, right? There's something that, like farming, you have to plant the seed, you have to water it, you have to nurture it, you have to ensure that it gets sunlight, that it doesn't get clouded by the many other things that could stifle out the
100%.
progress of that seed.
100%.
Yeah. Who then, in that landscape, fights alongside you for clean energy? Because it's very clear in the name, Vote Solar is what you want these legislators to help support. Who fights alongside you in that?
Yeah, well, and one, I want to just make a quick plug for how this work is even possible in the first place, because the beauty of Vote Solar, we are entirely donor supported. A lot of our funding comes from family foundations. A lot of it comes from individual donors. And that means we're not having to seek out short-term profit goals. Like we are a not-for-profit. And so we're able to zoom out a little bit because our funders are patient. Our donors believe in us, not just our ability to deliver in Q2 or Q3. And so a quick plug, if you're interested in donating to Vote Solar, votesolar.org makes it very easy to support us.
Who fights alongside you in this battle?
Yeah, so everything we do is in coalition with other groups. Right? We don't ever fight alone. Even in the regulatory place, when we're trying to implement good solar laws, we work with other intervening parties. And so in the regulatory space, I do want to shout out the Environmental Law and Policy Center, who does tremendous work. There are lawyers in a lot of places. Union of Concerned Scientists rides along us with a lot of those like in the weeds regulatory conversations. On the legislative side, these coalitions are big, right? These are 100+ groups, and it's labor, it's education organizations, it's 501c3 lobby organizations. But what we've learned in the last few years is that we can't use the old business model, even on the advocacy side, to achieve the new clean energy future. And so I think the awakening of the last 5-6 years is we need everyone to fix everything. And that includes community-based organizations that were often left outside of those conversations.
I think actually that's a really interesting place to drill down, because one of the things in the back of my mind is, well, we know who's fighting for it, but what we often don't know is who's fighting against it. I was just talking with someone about an organization called Moms for Liberty that just squashed in a very literal way, they just squashed the hopes of a factory for helium in South Carolina. And it's tragic. And honestly, it's almost as though the industry didn't even see it coming and didn't see it happen. And I've talked to folks from my home state of South Carolina who have said that Moms for Liberty has infinite funding. Infinite funding to squash solar manufacturing, something that is supported in our current domestic legislation.
The enemies of progress have long known the power of grassroots mobilization. This is part of their playbook. It's part of the utility playbook, frankly. They give a fair amount of money to community-based organizations and have for a long time because they know that there's a certain political power and moral authority that just comes from being rooted in a place. You look at the opposition to wind and solar, large-scale wind and solar projects, and a lot of that is pretty scrappy still. It's well-funded from on high, but it is funding these local, not in my backyard efforts. And so we work at Vote Solar to listen to those groups. And
how do you find them?
So a lot of them help, especially in the last few years, have helped make their own voices heard.
They're very good at social media.
And we try to listen and then channel some of those community wishes and dreams into legislative language and into policy, because they know their communities best. And at times we can help to translate that into policy. That said, many of them are very savvy on policy too. I feel like there's this tendency to look at community-based organizations and assume there might not be a sophistication there to dig right into the weeds.
Oh, Lord.
They're there with us, and they're there in the Capitol. They're there fighting for policy. They're there with rallies, but they're also there in negotiating meetings, helping figure this out.
To call someone out specifically, how do we as a development sector deal with grassroots organizations that are being literally trained by the likes of Susan Ralston to advocate against everything that we stand for, and using very like scare tactics, but in a very organized way. How do we defend against something like that?
Yeah, and I assume you're talking especially about some of the large-scale solar and wind opposition.
In particular along the eastern seaboard, starting in Virginia. But I'm telling you, it's like a cancer. It spreads quickly. The playbook gets perfected in one state, and then it multiplies.
And I'll answer the question directly in a second, but one important reminder here is just the power of distributed energy resources as we continue to face these headwinds on utility scale wind and solar. Like, we need both, and we need as much as possible of both. But like, even those people who are frothing at the mouth trying to stop large scale wind and solar, they have a hard time hating solar, right? And they get excited about other opportunities. So you can use that as a bit of a wedge.
That's really good.
To help unpack that.
Little Tai Chi.
Yeah, you can start to redirect that
judo,
energy.
Right?
Exactly. And so that helps to like open that conversation a little bit, because solar still has pretty widespread bipartisan appeal.
Of course.
You're starting to see some cracks in that foundation, but it's still there. And so it's really more about helping those voices in the community, which are sort of like that silent majority in a lot of small towns, who either don't especially care or do believe in these projects and believe in landowner rights, like believe in the ability for someone to make their own future.
Georgia is facing this in a big way right
100%.
now. Landowner rights is being challenged, is being contested.
But they feel scared, right? Like, imagine you're in that committee room and you've got 10 people in a row all testifying who are funded and supported, and they have each other's back. And then you've got one or two lone voices who have to go on the tail end of that in your own town, right? With your neighbors. And so you have to build that community and that solidarity of those believers of the clean energy future in order to outweigh those very loud, not in my backyard voices.
You use the term widespread public support. I want to borrow that from you. How would we then build this widespread public support for distributed energy resources, in particular solar? But one of the things that Vote Solar has done is to be able to create these playbooks, to be able to seed the goodwill into places like Florida, right, where we was once long a bastion for solar hating. Everyone knew the Sunshine State should be the largest solar market. And Vote Solar effectively, along with a lot of other coalition of partners, unlocked that state.
We sure did.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a big campaign. And it was a lot of fun for some of my colleagues down there.
So I guess the question there is, what are the effective mechanisms? How do we learn from what happened in Florida? And then what are some telltale signs from other states that we should watch out for?
Yeah, so I mean, we
got another hour.
Every solar customer becomes a solar voter. Right, that is something that we've known at Vote Solar for a long time. A lot of our members who are regular donors or action takers with Vote Solar, they've got panels on their roof, or they're a community solar subscriber, and that builds a lot of political capital just there. So we're seeing some momentum gain just naturally as this number of solar customers continues to multiply. We need more customers, but we also need those customers to be fully representative of America. And right now, they're not, right? It has traditionally been a little bit easier for wealthier individuals to invest in solar. And that is great. It's every panel counts. We need like as many rooftop power plants as we can get. But in order to build that like widespread public appeal and political capital, we need to reduce disparities, and we need to start deploying solar at scale in lower income communities and on multifamily housing. And those are harder nuts to crack, right? Those are not simple asks to make of the clean energy industry. But that's one piece where Vote Solar tries to figure out what sort of policy interventions are needed to redirect that flow away from its natural channels towards existing pockets of wealth or privilege and towards the communities that might be starting to feel really left out by this transition. And so that's, building a just transition for fossil workers. So it's rural issues and it's very urban issues, right? It's trying to ensure that everybody sees themselves in that equitable clean energy future.
Well said. I don't think I have anything to add to that. The legacy of Vote Solar and Adam Browning and all that he started is in good hands with guys like you.
Thank you.
On the team.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to the bright career that I see ahead of you. I think that, I really mean that. I think that with people like you helping on the advocacy side, there's hope, right? Like, I think that the baton has been passed to you and Sach and the team. Like, it's really it's encouraging having watched Vote Solar from its earliest days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nico. I mean, that means a lot coming from you. You're somebody I look up to, and all the work
thanks.
you're doing to spread the word and refine the message and help ensure that we're keeping the right path here.
Yeah.
I put on a vest this morning because you looked so good in it yesterday, and then I was like, I can't quite pull it off.
Oh,
Give me
man.
a couple years, and I'll have the courage and the looks to pull it off.
You'll get there. I think I believe in you.
I hope so.
I advocate for the vest.
Yeah, it's a great look. Yeah.
Bring back the vest. # bring back the vest.
You heard it here first, folks.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope that you now feel a little more equipped to build your own advocacy, your own coalition. Join the work of Vote Solar. Join the work of SEIA. There are so many fine organizations that are out there championing the legislation that gives you the power to build your solar company. Don't take it for granted, folks. It is our civic duty, both in your hometown, in your state, in your region. Get to work. Thank you for taking the time to join us here. Thank you, John Delurey, and everything that Vote Solar is doing for helping make our work easier.
Thanks again, Nico. Thanks for having me.